Heat is the invisible enemy of rocketry. Most people look at the fire coming out of the bottom. They see the smoke, they see the power, but the real war happens before the engines ever light. It happens inside the tanks. It happens in the pipes. It happens in the silent, freezing cold world of the fuel farm. Cryogenic fuel is a quiet killer. It boils off fast. It leaks through gaps you can't even see with your eyes. It turns strong metal brittle like glass. It can wreck a whole day in seconds. And at Starbase, the problem gets worse. Starship needs a flood of liquid oxygen. It needs liquid methane too. It needs it fast. It needs it cold. It needs it steady. That is the wall. That is why the tank farm matters. If you stand near the launch site, you see it. You see steel tanks and thick pipes. You see concrete berms like giant guardrails. You see a place built for one job: fill a massive ship on time and do it again. You felt this kind of problem before. It's the same feeling as a tool that works once, then fails when you need it. You don't blame the idea, you blame the setup. Rockets are like that. The ship can be ready, the engines can be ready, the plan can be ready, then the fuel system says no. That is why SpaceX built an entire tank farm. It sits east of the pad. It is not a side detail, it is the heart that feeds the beast. And this is where it gets interesting. The first thing you notice is scale. The farm stores thousands of tons of liquid oxygen. That is not a typo. Thousands of tons. It's the kind of number that changes your thinking. It tells you this is not a one-off stunt. This is a system meant to run. It also tells you the work is not glamorous. It is pumps and valves. It is insulation and sensors. It is welds you never see. It is the part that decides if the countdown lives or dies. You already know oxygen sounds simple. We breathe it. We talk about it like air. But liquid oxygen is not air. It is a very cold liquid. It sits at about minus 183 degrees Celsius. That cold turns water into rock. It turns rubber stiff. It shrinks metal hard. So the tank farm has to fight heat, not with one trick, with layers of tricks. The outer shells of the tanks look white in photos. Those shells hide an inner tank. That inner tank holds the cold liquid. Between them is a defense zone. Perlite granules fill that space. Perlite is expanded volcanic glass. It looks like tiny white pebbles. It traps heat like a blanket, and there is also a vacuum gap. Less air means less heat transfer. Like a thermos you keep coffee in. Same idea. Much higher stakes. This is the part most people miss. The tank farm is not one big tank. It is many tanks and many lines. SpaceX started with 6 tall vertical tanks. You can count them in old shots. 6 big, upright stainless steel. Those were the original look. They became a symbol of Starbase early on, but the layout did not stay frozen. Some of those tall tanks got phased out. The system moved toward horizontal tanks for resilience. That word matters. Resilience is not a buzzword here. It means if one thing gets hit, the whole site does not fold. That shift tells you something about how they learn. They build, they test, they see what breaks, then they change the setup. No drama, just results. That is competence you can respect. It's also a scoreboard you can read. Old setup, 6 vertical tanks. New setup, more horizontal tanks in key spots. It is a straight before and after, and it points to their end goal. More uptime, more repeats, more launches without long gaps. Now look at where the tanks sit. They are not right next to the pad. They are not far away either. They sit in a zone east of the launch mount. You see concrete berms around them. Those berms are not for looks. They are there for blast and debris. They also help shape the site. They create compartments. They limit how a failure spreads. You've seen this pattern in factories. You put the risky stuff behind barriers. You keep the main work line running. Near the tanks is a GSE bunker. GSE means ground support equipment. That is the site gear that feeds the rocket. The bunker houses control panels and pumps. It is where the valves get told what to do. It is where the data comes in. It is where operators watch numbers move. They are not guessing. They are tracking pressures and temps. They are watching flow rate. They are trying to keep the fuel cold and dense. Dense fuel is key. It packs more oxygen into the same volume. That helps performance. It also helps helps keep the ship's tanks fuller. That changes the whole mission plan. And this is where it gets good. The tank farm does not just store oxygen, it conditions it. You see gray, horizontal subcoolers in public photos. Those are used for oxygen densification. In plain talk, they cool it even more. Liquid oxygen is already cold at -183 Celsius. Subcooling pushes it colder. You hear numbers like -200 Celsius in talk around the site. That extra cold makes oxygen denser. Denser oxygen means more mass in the ship's tanks. More mass means more engine power for the same tank space. That is not magic. It is simple physics. But pulling it off at this scale is hard. This is the first impossible moment in a real way. The impossible part is not making oxygen cold. The impossible part is doing it fast, then keeping it that cold, then pushing it through long pipes, then doing it again. Heat is always trying to sneak in. Every foot of pipe is a fight. Every valve seat is a leak risk. Every weld is a weak spot if it is sloppy. That is why you see insulated lines. You even see orange insulated lines in videos. Those lines carry cryogenic fluids. They also vent vapors during ops. You see plumes in the air, foggy white clouds under a Texas sun. That is the system breathing. You have watched videos like this. You see a quiet pad, then a vent starts, then another, then the whole area looks like a cold fog machine. That is not just show, it is boil off and venting. Cryogenic liquids want to warm up. When they warm, they turn into gas. Gas takes up more space. Pressure goes up, so the farm has relief valves. It has burst discs. It has ways to dump pressure safely. That is not optional. It is a must. Because if pressure keeps rising, metal can fail, and the consequences are immediate. Here is a near-miss moment you can picture. A valve is supposed to open. It opens slow. Pressure rises. A number on a screen climbs. The operator sees it. The pump sound changes. The vent line starts to frost. They have about 30 seconds to choose. Do they keep flowing or do they stop and vent? That is not panic. That is the job. That is system mastery. You don't win with hope. You win with control. SpaceX has built that control into the site. The bunker is the nerve center. The software watches the system. You hear talk of digital twins. That means a live model of the system. It mirrors sensor data in real time. It helps predict what comes next. That can stop problems early. It can also speed decisions. If you have ever run a shop, you know the value. The boss who sees the whole board wins. The boss who guesses loses. Now connect that to what you already believe. Real progress comes from the boring details, not speeches, not posters. It comes from parts that work and keep working. The tank farm is one of those parts. It is where SpaceX turns a rocket into a repeatable machine. They are not just building a ship, they are building a pipeline. Fuel in, ship full, flight, then do it again. This is where the older launch sites struggled. They were built for low tempo. They were built for rare events. Big rockets launched a few times a year. The ground gear could be slow. It could be labor heavy. It could be hand run. Starship is aiming at a different world. It is aiming at rapid cycles. That pushes the tank farm into the spotlight. But here's the thing, the tank farm is not just big. It is tuned. It is designed around the problem of minimal boil off. That phrase matters. Boil off is lost fuel. Lost fuel is lost time and money. It can also cause scrubs. When oxygen warms, it vents. When it vents, you lose density. When you lose density, your fill level changes. Now let's talk about the inside of those tanks. Public photos do not show open interiors. That makes sense. Cryogenic tank internals are not a tourist feature. They are also proprietary. But the basics are physics. You have baffles to stop sloshing. You have sensors to read levels. You have cleaning systems to keep things pure. Oxygen systems hate dirt. They hate grease. Even a tiny bit of oil can cause a fire in high-pressure oxygen. So the tanks are kept surgically clean. You also get a sense of the kind of team required. This is not only rocket engineers. It is cryogenic techs. It is welders and inspectors. It is pump specialists. It is the blue-collar side of high tech. These are people who know how to seal a flange. They know how to spot a hairline crack. They know the sound of a happy pump versus a struggling one. That human element is the glue. The computers watch the data. The people watch the reality. Now look at the competitive side. The scoreboard in this story is not launch count. It is loss rate and refill speed. Other programs take hours to fill a tank. They take days to reset after a scrub. Starship aims to fill in under an hour. It aims to reset immediately. That speed is the weapon. If you can fill fast, you can launch fast. If you can launch fast, you can learn fast. And this leads to the moisture problem. Dry nitrogen purges are not just nice to have, they protect insulation performance over time. Moisture freezing into ice bridges can turn a good design into a failure. Ice conducts heat better than air, so if ice forms inside the insulation gap, the tank warms up. The boil-off spikes, the mission suffers. Resource efficiency is part of it too. A scrub wastes more than time. It wastes chilled liquid oxygen. It wastes labor hours. It wastes range time. It wastes money. SpaceX hates waste. You can see it in how they recover boosters. You can see it in how they reuse ships. The tank farm is part of that same mindset. Don't waste the fuel. Don't waste the cold. Keep it tight, keep it ready. Now the digital side takes it bigger. The same control setup scales with complexity. As Starbase grows, the tank farm can grow too. More tanks and more routes raise the load on humans. The digital twin is how you keep up. It lets operators manage more hardware without losing the plot. It is like power steering for a massive machine. SpaceX also leans on build quality checks. Welds are X-rayed. That is not a vibe. That is a process. X-ray trucks are common on site. They park next to pipes at night. They shoot images of the metal joints. They look for voids. They look for cracks. They look for anything that could fail under pressure. This is standard in oil and gas. SpaceX adopted it because it works. They didn't reinvent the wheel. They just used the right wheel. Now we address the fear everyone has. What if liquid oxygen and methane mix? The data points to 3 mitigation ideas. First, separation in space and piping makes mixing hard. Second, density differences reduce the chance of easy mixing in storage. Third, there are no ignition sources in storage. That last part matters. If you keep ignition away, even a leak does not automatically become a fire. Here's a reveal you can appreciate. Density differences help, but only if you design around them. The farm avoids easy mixing by keeping products in their own tanks and lines. That sounds obvious, but in a complex site, lines cross. Trenches get crowded. Keeping things separate takes planning. It takes discipline in the drawing room and discipline in the trench. You might ask why they do not just insulate more. They do insulate, but insulation has limits. You still have fittings, you still have joints, you still have valves, you still have a long run to the launch mount. Each weak spot leaks heat. So SpaceX uses a system approach. They accept heat leaks, but they fight them with subcoolers, they fight them with speed. They don't try to be perfect, they try to be fast enough to beat the physics. Now, a small competitive frame. The real race here is against physics. Physics says oxygen boils at -183, SpaceX pushes toward -200. That is a 17-degree drop. That 17 degrees buys density and margin. And liquid nitrogen gives the cold headroom at -196. That is a tight band. It forces careful heat exchange design. It forces careful flow control. It forces good insulation. SpaceX is playing in that narrow space on purpose. That is where the gains live. Another numbers moment. Think about 5,000 tons per launch. Now think about a truck. A tanker truck holds maybe 20 tons. Do the math. That is 250 trucks for one launch. That is a convoy. That is a traffic jam. That is a logistics nightmare. You cannot launch weekly if you need 250 trucks every time. The roads can't take it. The drivers can't take it. So SpaceX had to solve the supply chain too. They built an air separation unit, an ASU. That is a fancy name for a factory that pulls oxygen out of the air. It cools the air, it separates the nitrogen and oxygen, it turns them into liquid, right there on site. No trucks, no traffic, just power in, fuel out. That is how you scale. You stop buying retail. You build your own factory. That move alone tells you they are serious. You don't build an ASU for a science project. You build it for an industry. And this brings us back to the regulatory hit. The berms, you might remember the news. SpaceX got in trouble for not building berms fast enough. The Railroad Commission stepped in. That is the regulator in Texas. They handle oil and gas safety. They said the tanks needed better containment. They were right. The oversight was simple. The designers did not account for the rules. They built the tanks without the required berms. No malice, just speed blindness. But rules are rules. SpaceX had to pause. They had to pour concrete. They had to fix the containment. It cost time. It cost money. But it made the site safer. You see where this is going. The old vertical methane tanks did not just vanish. SpaceX phased them out for methane use. They shifted those vertical tanks to other jobs. They used them for water. They used them for nitrogen. Those fluids still matter. But the methane job moved to the horizontal tanks. The fix was not just add a wall. The fix was a full shift in the tank farm idea. The first farm was compact and symmetric. The new farm had large horizontal tanks with berms. That changed pipe runs. It changed valves. It changed how the site expanded. It also changed how the old berms were used. Berm removal helped expansion later. That sounds backward at first, but it fits the timeline. First, berms were needed for compliance. Later, some berms could be removed or changed to make room. The key is that the site kept evolving. There is a pattern here. SpaceX moves fast. Fast building is a strength. It is also a risk. Fast building can miss local details. Rules are not a guess. They are written. They are enforced. And enforcement does not care about a rocket schedule. That is the hard truth. Speed wins when it is paired with rule awareness. Speed loses when it assumes rules will bend. Here is a near-miss moment that lives inside this job. You have a truck at the pad. The hose is connected. The manifold is open. Pressure spikes. A seal blows. Suddenly you have a cloud of gas. It is flammable. It is cold. It is dangerous. The safety systems have to catch that. The sensors have to trip. The valves have to slam shut. If they don't, you have a disaster. If they do, you have a report. SpaceX wants reports, not disasters. Here's a simple three-step method SpaceX leans on. First, keep deliveries steady. Don't flood the site. Second, unload through controlled manifold connections. Don't improvise lines. Third, reduce dependence when possible using on-site production. Those steps sound basic, but doing them at 230 to 370 truck deliveries is not basic. It is a grind, it is planning, it is discipline, it is the kind of work that separates talk from results. Now we hit the reveal about numbers. The refill numbers tell you what Starship is aiming for. A system that can eat about 5,000 tons per launch is built for big missions. It is built for heavy cargo. It is built for repeat attempts. You don't build a tank farm like that for a one-off. You build it because you want cadence, you want repetition, you want volume. And volume is how costs drop. That is how you win over time. You've seen this in other industries. A shop that builds one custom item a year stays expensive. A shop that builds 100 gets efficient. Spaceflight has long been stuck in the custom world. Starship is trying to move it toward the volume world. The trucks are part of that. The pads are part of that. The bunker operations are part of that. Even the boring stuff is part of that, because the boring stuff is where you either scale or you don't. Now let's put a clear number-based scoreboard on it. One launch consumes about 5,000 tons. One truck carries about 20 tons. So you need hundreds of deliveries. That is the reality check. If you can handle closer to 20 trucks per day, you can top off in about 2 days. If you only manage closer to 4 per day, you stretch toward 4 days and beyond. That range is the operational battleground. It is not a tweet. It is not a hype video. It is scheduling and valves. And because this is a real system, it has real consequences. If your suppliers miss a day, the refill pace drops. If a pad is down, you lose throughput. If a manifold leaks, you stop. The system is tight. It has to be. Compare that to the old way. NASA's SLS holds huge amounts of fuel too, but it flies once every 2 years. The ground systems can rest. They can be fixed slowly. They don't need to turn around in an hour. They don't need to support a fleet. The pressure is different. The mission is different. SpaceX is building for a railroad. NASA built for a moonshot. Both are hard, but the railroad is harder to keep running. Think about that oxygen again. 3,600 tons, gone in minutes, controlled, managed, used exactly when needed. That used to sound insane. Now it's normal, and this leads to the future payoff. With this fuel system proven, bigger ships become possible, longer missions become possible, refueling in space becomes realistic. You cannot refuel in space if you cannot manage flow on Earth. This was step 1, and it worked. Here's the final reveal. Once you master draining fuel fast, you master time. And time is the real enemy in rockets. The system turned a weakness into an advantage. High flow stopped being a risk. It became the edge. That's the transformation. Hard physics respected, not fought. The booster drains. The ship drains. The mission continues. And the rest of the industry is still catching up.